Part 2, A Shadow Over Our Valley. Chapter 6, Radio Mullah. I was at the home of one of my relatives in Mingora one evening when I heard a strange sobbing coming from the radio. After a long day of cooking, the women had gathered around the radio as they cleaned up. As usual, I was doing my best to get out of having to do the dishes, but I stopped at the sound of this odd weeping. At first, it sounded like just another imam giving advice about how to live a virtuous life. "Quit smoking," he told the men, "and pray daily." The women murmured in approval, my mother among them. Then he began to cry. "Stop listening to music," he begged. "Stop going to movies. Stop dancing. Stop," he begged, "or God will send another earthquake to punish us all." Some of the women began to cry. Terrifying memories of the earthquakes the previous year were fresh in their minds. Some of them had buried children and husbands and were still grieving. I knew what this Radio Mullah was saying wasn't true. An earthquake is a geological event that can be explained by science, I wanted to tell them. But these women, many of whom had no education and who were brought up to follow the dictations of their religious leaders, were frightened. As the Mullah wept, so did they. Even at school, all my friends could talk about was the Radio Mullah, although my father told us not to listen. Our old radio was broken, so I hadn't heard his latest broadcast, but I heard it from my friends and relatives' houses, and my friends at school repeated his nightly sermons almost word for word. All music was haram, he said, forbidden by Islam. Only his radio station was permitted. Men would grow their hair and beards long, not keep them short, in what he called the innovative fashion. And women, he said, should stay at home and purr at quarters at all times. They should go out only in emergencies and only wearing the burqa and only with a male relative. At first, my mother had enjoyed his sermons when she listened to them with our relatives, especially when he spoke about the need for daily prayer. People, especially women, romanticized about him. People thought he was a good interpreter of the Holy Quran and admitted his charisma. They liked his talk of bringing back Islamic law because everyone was frustrated. With the slow, corrupt Pakistani justice system, his followers chanted poems and sounded beautiful, but were in fact messages to motivate girls to stop going to school. My father disapproved of him from the beginning. "No Radio Mullah is going to tell me what to do. This Mullah," he declared, "is nonsense and trouble." "Don't speak that way," my mother told him. "God will be angry with you." My father turned out to be right. He had done some investigating of the man behind the mysterious radio voice. This Mullah is a high school dropout. He doesn't even have religious credentials. This so-called Mullah is spreading ignorance. The voice on the radio belonged to the Malala Fazlullah, one of the leaders of the TNSM. His followers had helped so many people after the earthquake, but he was taking advantage of the trauma to instill fear in them too. Soon, Fazlullah's attacks became personal. He announced the names of men who'd spoken out against him. People we knew, people we didn't know, people who were campaigning for peace in the valley, but also people who thought they were having a private conversation. They were all suddenly, publicly called sinful. It was if this Radio Mullah and his men could see through our walls. Now that I was getting older, it wasn't so easy to sit in the men's discussions without being noticed, so I would offer to serve them tea. If only I could hear what matters they were most discussing. In those days, there were only two topics of conversation, the Radio Mullah and the fighting just across the border in Afghanistan. I was 4 years old when the 9/11 attacks took place, but I'd grown up hearing the name Osama bin Laden. In our country, everyone knows about 9/11 and Osama bin Laden. It was said that he'd helped plan those attacks not far away in Afghanistan, and for the past several years, the United States and its allies had been fighting a war to find him and to defeat al-Qaeda and the Taliban government in Afghanistan, which was protecting him. The Taliban, as soon as I would hear the word, my ears perked up. I think back to the conversation I had with my father when we were in Shangla. The Taliban seemed like something far away then, something bad in a distant place. Many of my father's friends believed that despite how popular Fazlullah was becoming and his association with the Taliban in Pakistan, they were still too far away to be concerned. But he warned them that this would become a day when the Taliban would reach our valley. "They are already in the tribal belt," he said, "and they are coming nearer." Then he quoted a proverb, "Coming events cast their shadows before." Fazlullah moved slowly at first, but in the 2 years that followed the earthquake, he cast a long shadow indeed. I was growing up, and for the first time it occurred to me that our world was changing before my eyes, and not for the better. When I was to go to bed each night, I had a talk with God. "Please, God, tell me what I can do. I'm a small girl, but maybe you can have a small job for me." I woke up one day with a plan. I would ignore all this Fazalula gossip when I got to school. My friends and I should be talking about Bella and Edward and our fruity from the Indian TV show Sound Prayer. If those topics were off limits for the time being, we could talk about cricket or annoying little brothers or 100 other things. But when I arrived at school, my friends were all huddled in the corner talking about the latest sermon. The night before, Fazalul had announced that schools for girls were haram. This man had just declared our peaceful sanctuary forbidden by the Holy Quran. He was only a voice on the radio then. What we didn't know was that he would go much further in his campaign against girls' school in the days ahead. All right, chapter 6 question. Radio Mullah, how does Fazalullah get people to listen to him and his teaching? How do you think his teaching will influence others over time? Please answer your question on the Padlet.